Today on Upfront,
Education is a right. We won't go without a fight.
cuts and controversy on campus. UW chancellors fight back against Governor Walker's proposed $300 million in cuts to the UW system, while the governor has to explain how his budget shop tried to change the Wisconsin idea. UW system president Ray Cross responds to it all next on Upfront. Then the governor wants to freeze public school spending while lifting the cap on school vouchers statewide. Two educators on how his plans would affect public and private schools in Wisconsin.
Covering the issues important to Wisconsin. This is Upfront with Mike Goucher.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Upfront. It's been the guiding principle for the University of Wisconsin for 110 years. But for a while last week, it appeared the Wisconsin idea might soon become a thing of the past. In his budget message Tuesday, Governor Walker proposed cutting the UW system by $300 million, but also giving it greater flexibility, greater autonomy. That was controversial in itself, but then it was learned that some in the Walker administration tried to rewrite the UW mission statement, inserting language on career readiness and striking references to public service and the search for truth. The administration quickly backtracked, calling it a drafting error. But the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel revealed a budget memo specifically seeking the changes. On Thursday, Governor Walker said it was a simple miscommunication in budget discussions, and he pledged to keep the Wisconsin idea intact. He also called the controversy no big deal. We're talking more about this now and the proposed budget cuts with UW System President Ray Cross, who joins us from our Madison affiliate, WKOW-TV. President Cross, it's good to have you on the program again. Let me begin by asking you if you agree with the governor's assessment that this was no big deal.
Well, I don't agree that it was no big deal, although I would argue that I think that I really appreciate what the governor said. I think it was an honest assessment of what was a, if you can call it, a communications mistake between the governor and the folks at DOA and our office, working back and forth. The intent here was not to do what happened, and I think he has been very honest in what he described in his press release. So I really appreciate.
You're comfortable, President Cross, with his explanation that it was a drafting error, that it was a miscommunication? You don't feel this somehow reflected his own personal views about what the university should or should not be?
No, not whatsoever, not at all. I think that Mike Heifetz, who called and apologized to me, they had a misunderstanding, and I really respect and appreciate the honesty with which they're approaching this.
Let me play devil's advocate for a moment. You're a strong supporter of the Wisconsin idea, but as you well know, businesses update their mission statements, nonprofits update their mission statements, even churches sometimes update their mission statements. This is a mission statement from 1904. Would it not be proper to have a discussion about whether that adequately reflects a 21st century situation?
Oh, I agree with that, Mike. I think that it's quite all right to have that conversation. I would also argue that if there were any changes proposed, it would go through a normal process involving the board, shared governance, and so forth. And I think that the governor's idea of including workforce readiness or workforce development specifically in the mission, I don't find that problematic at all. That is a piece that could be added to the mission statement. I would add that that should go through the process, working with faculty, working with students and staff, and of course the board. And I think that he raises a good suggestion there. That it has merit. It's something we should look at.
Let me have you respond to what was said at Thursday's Board of Regents meeting by UW-Madison Chancellor Becky Blank. She said she's worried about what these $300 million in budget cuts are going to mean for the university, that other universities are already looking to poach the best and brightest from the University of Wisconsin, that they've already lost a couple of people who are going to come to work there. Do you share her belief that these cuts would seriously damage the University of Wisconsin-Madison?
I think they would seriously damage the whole system. Perhaps more acutely, some of the issues she raised in terms of attracting and retaining top-notch faculty. And just in the last couple of days, she has had two very attractive faculty candidates with outstanding credentials and research experience as well as funding step aside and pull out of that search. And one of them in particular had deep Wisconsin roots, so that is very troubling. And both of them told her that it was because of the turmoil that's currently going on. So yeah, that is very troubling. To your second question about cuts, of course, that's extremely difficult for us. We know that. And part of this process is try to figure out exactly what those cuts are, the extent to which the $150 million is growing as a result of discovering different pieces that aren't covered in the budget or that have been withdrawn that we currently get funding for as well that will have to continue. So those are things we're trying to assess. We're trying to understand exactly what's in the proposal and exactly what it means to us. And at our March board meeting with the board, what we're intending to do is describe the impact to each of the campuses and to the entire system and what that means. And at that point, we should also have the Legislative Fiscal Bureau's assessment of this, as well as further analysis on our own.
Chancellor Blank, other UW chancellors are suggesting that alums lobby lawmakers to try to get them to reconsider this. Do you feel, because of the state's tight fiscal situation, that these $300 million in cuts are inevitable?
No, I don't feel they're inevitable. I do not, Mike. I think, though, that we're going to have to make a very good case, and it's going to have to be a very factual case with substance. And legislators, I'm very comfortable with them listening to that, but I also have to be respectful of the situation they are in. Obviously, with a $100 million cut to the Department of Corrections, with the challenges the Department of Transportation is facing, K-12 throughout the state and their needs, we're just one of the elements at that table seeking funding. So I think you rightly described the pressure that legislators are under, not obviously just from the university. However, I'm pretty optimistic that we influence that with rational, thoughtful, reasonable arguments. No one, I don't care which party you're in, wants to hurt the university. Do they believe the university could be more streamlined? Yes, we already believe it. We're working on that too. However, I don't think it's going to result in $150 million worth of savings by July 1. That's part of our challenge.
President Ray Cross is the head of the UW system. We appreciate your time. Thank you very much for being with us.
Mike, as always, thank you.
Republican Senate Majority Leader Scott Fitzgerald tells our editorial partner, WisPolitics.com, that the public authority portion of the governor's UW plan might be a tough sell in his caucus. You can read more about that and keep on top of budget coverage at the budget blog on WisPolitics.com. Coming up next, the governor's plans for K-12 education. We'll hear from two educators, one leading a private school, one leading public schools, on the effects of statewide voucher expansion. And then later.
I mean, obviously you can't bring my son back now, or our son, I should say, but let's save some other sons or daughters.
A parent's search for answers after their son dies of a drug overdose at the Tomah VA.
Up Front with Mike Goucher, brought to you by the American Transmission Company and the Wisconsin Corn Growers Association.